Welcome to the show, IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling. It's Wednesday. That means Mailbag Day. That's Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. Doesn't matter where Jesse is. Internet issues, follow him. Cleveland, South Bend. Doesn't matter. Are you there? And apparently that answers that question. Again, I was trying to have a little bit of fun with it, but there we go. Right off the bat, Jesse was having. We're a few minutes behind getting the show started tonight, and Jesse finally popped in after he had texted me saying, "Hey, I'm on the way," and he said he was having internet issues right before things started today. So we are off to a rousing start. Not quite as good as things went for Marcus Freeman at the start of signing day today when they got some kind of late, last minute, very good news. Chad Bowden said that he heard a big scream go up for Marcus Freeman in another part of the football building over there earlier today. Madden Farrow signing with the Irish on signing day.
Well, I think it was a unique one, right? One that came down to today. We talked last night, and his mind wasn't made up. We talked this morning. His mind wasn't made up, and sometime after his conversations with our coaching staff, myself, Chad Bowden, he came to the realization that this was the place he wanted to be. And it was funny. I was talking to him. I said, "Man, I kept saying, choose hard, choose hard. You know, that's what we use around here." He said, "Coach, I chose God." And I thought that was a powerful statement and speaks volumes about the young man and his family. But one of those ones that came down to the last minute. And until the papers came in, you still were, we're on pins and needles.
On pins and needles, right down until the papers came in. But they came in, and it worked out well for Notre Dame and for Madden as well. So very good, I guess not even start to signing day, because that was really just a little bit before the signing day press conference, which is at 1:00 Eastern time this afternoon. But they got Madden, so they got a really good linebacker class, 25 total who signed today. That includes the quarterback, Blake Hebert, and two other linebackers that they got, and they were really excited about the group of linebackers, again, including Van Faramo. So things worked out pretty well for Marcus Freeman to kick off signing day today. Today, of course, is Mailbag Day, so slide your mailbag questions into the chat. Our good buddy Salty has bombed us with quite a few. We got a couple others queued up in there and ready to go as well. Do, of course, want to tell you about MyBookie. And if you've been following football this season, you know it's been a wild ride. We're hitting the home stretch, and the favorites are cashing in at a historic rate. And I've been using MyBookie this season. And if you've been wondering where to start, I've got a little bit of a cheat code for you. It's called Risk-Free Thursdays. Every Thursday, you take advantage of a no-pressure bet that's there to help you build up your bankroll. Just look under your Bet Boost tab in the sports book, and you'll see it. It's basically a free shot at some extra cash. And I mean, who doesn't love that? And look, I get why people might ask, why MyBookie? Well, here's my take on that. They make it easy for us to bet smart and bet big, because it's not just about throwing out random parlays. It's about finding value and making plays that make sense. So if you haven't jumped in yet, use my promo code IRISH, very simple one, IRISH, on your first deposit, and they'll double your money instantly. I'm talking extra cash in your account right away. No wait, no hassle, and you can use it on any game you want. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie. There's Jesse.
I hope this is better.
Did you switch to your phone?
No.
Okay. Well, I mean, it looks a little choppy right now. I guess we'll see how it goes. You're here anyway. I heard your voice. I heard your answer. We'll see how it goes. Good to have you back.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on right now.
Well, I think you've talked about it before. There appears to be some Cleveland infrastructure issues over there with internet every day at 5 o'clock, right?
I guess so, but I had great smooth internet all day, so I don't know what went wrong.
Hey, it's all right. We don't have to belabor it. Let's just jump into the mailbag. We've got plenty of questions here. Let's start up with Mark because he was the first one to pop a question into the chat tonight. Thoughts on the all-white uniforms instead of the traditional uniforms for the traditional USC rivalry game? Mark is not a fan of breaking the tradition. What'd you think about the all-white Saturday?
Yeah, I love the all white uniforms. I thought they were great. I thought we talked about this a little bit last night in Rapid Fire. I think there's nothing cleaner than the all white, and then afterwards, when they're all dirty, you get to see the reward of all your hard work.
I liked him as well. You know, my only hesitancy was the fact that they wore him in the Clemson game last year. So as soon as I saw they were wearing him, it's like, oh, they better win this thing. And then it was, you know, it was a little bit sluggish from time to time. I don't mind him at all. I like the look. I think we talked about it a little bit yesterday. Joe loves the look as well. I mean, I get it. Not everyone's, it's never going to be unanimous on this because everyone's just always going to have their personal preference, right? It's like to drink or not to drink. And then it's like, which beer are you a fan of? Are you a craft beer guy? Or are you a Bud Light guy or a Miller Light guy or a Coors Light guy or whatever it happens, you know, or are you a cocktail guy? Are you a bourbon guy? I'm not a bourbon guy. I'm a beer guy, you know? So it's like everyone's got their preferences on everything. So not everyone's going to like them. I did like them. Now that they've won in them, I don't think that there's going to be a hang up anymore. So I thought I think it's a pretty cool look. And it's one of those looks, you know, you wear it once a year. I'm perfectly fine with it. So there are plenty of people who didn't like the white pants with the blue jerseys against Georgia Tech either. That's exactly right, Tom. Yingling and Guinness. That's a good way to go as well. There's nothing wrong with that in my book. So let's jump into what'd you think about this? Salty, in the college football playoff rankings, Miami heavily penalized for the recent loss. Was the drop out of the playoffs too much? I mean, they did put them at 12, but based on, you know, the seeding process and the whole thing, that drops them. What do you think? Is Miami deserving?
No, I don't think Miami is deserving. They had 2 losses, and then they played some other close games. You know, basically the eye test where, yes, they won some games, but they had some late comebacks, some favorable penalties, and, you know, squeezed out some games. And Miami had every chance to control its own destiny at this point. So if, you know, they could be in a conference championship game this weekend, but they're not. And
well, Jesse having some more internet issues. I mean, I agree with pretty much what he was saying that if it's, you know, I get it. 3-loss Alabama. Are you going to take 3-loss Alabama or are you going to take Miami? If it's between those two, which in the committee's eyes, you know, that was the decision, I do think Alabama has the better resume. You know, it's like, are 2 losses better than 3 losses? I mean, you can obviously have that debate, but the bottom line is Miami, its 2 losses are to Georgia Tech and to Syracuse. And Miami could have solved its own problem. If they had just beaten Syracuse, they're in the ACC championship game. And I think that probably also meant at least a spot or 2 higher in the rankings this week because they only would have had 1 loss, and I think they would have been in. So I've got no problem with Miami ultimately being potentially left out. And Jesse and I ran a bunch of different models with these conference championship games, and we're going to talk more about that at the start of Rapid Fire. Hopefully, if Jesse is here for rapid fire. But there's really no path. Miami ended up being ranked number 10. There's really no path for Miami ending up being in the college football playoff. They controlled their own destiny. Had they won, they most likely would have still been ahead of Alabama with just one loss. But I think that when you look at Alabama's 3 losses versus Miami's 2 losses and who Alabama beat versus who Miami beat, I do think that Alabama is more deserving of being in than Miami at the end of the day. Salty also wanted to know, do bowl games not part of the college football playoff still have conference tie-ins for team selections? I believe they do. Honestly, I have not been looking nearly as much at that this year because of the fact that, we have been so college football playoff focused, but I do believe that there are still plenty of conference affiliations with all of those different bowl games. But, again, I haven't looked at those nearly as closely this year because pretty much, all we've been paying attention to is Notre Dame going to make the playoff or not? That's kind of what it has come down to. We're going to try one more time with the prodigal son. How are you now?
I'm good. I don't know where. I just ran an internet speed test, and I have excellent speed. So I don't know if it's a Streamyard issue, if it's our connections trying to merge together. I don't know, but this seems to be working better.
All right. It looks better. You're not on delay, because when you were on before, when I would ask you a question, it took you a couple of seconds, I think, before, it actually heard and then you responded. So, hey, it happens. We've all been there. John wants to know, do we think Penn State ran up the score against Maryland last weekend? Penn State scored a touchdown on the last play of the game. The final score was 44-7. Did you see any of that? Any thoughts on if you think Penn State ran up the score?
I basically, I caught James Franklin kind of being asked about it in his post-game interview, and his response basically was, hey, you had your ones in there, I had my backups in there, and just because my backups are in there doesn't mean we're just going to dumb the offense down. They deserve to run the offense. They deserve, their opportunity just like everyone else. So I basically what he was saying is I had my backups in and we were running our offense and you had your ones and you still couldn't stop us. So it's really not really his problem. And I tend to agree because I think it's insulting if the backups get in there and you just hand the ball off and don't do anything to kind of reward them or to actually allow them to get some game experience that they've deserved, just like everyone else. This is game 12. They put in the hours, they put in the, the time in the weight room, the practices, whatever. So I just think that I don't mind it, unless you're just deliberately going out of your way to, I had a problem with what I think Ohio State did a couple of weeks ago because they acted like they were going into, we're going to run the ball, waste the clock. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh, just kidding. We're going to score a touchdown on you. So that's where I have a problem. But again, it's the backups and they're just running the playbook. So it is.
I'm the same. I had heard the same thing. I can't remember when or where it was. I heard the James Franklin comments as well. I mean, it's essentially stuff that Marcus Freeman has talked about, like when Steve Angeli is out there, whether it's, no matter what game, he's going to let the backups run the offense. Now, DK says he called a timeout. To me, that is maybe a little bit of a breach. But at the same time, if the other team is keeping their starters out there and you've got your second and third team guys out there and calling a timeout, I mean, maybe he dials it down a little bit if Maryland doesn't still have its number one guys out there on the field. So I've got no problem with it, because it comes down to you're letting those guys develop. You're not just asking your backup quarterback to hand off. You're not, just asking your backups basically to run a different offense just to kill the clock. You're still letting them go out there and play. So I've generally got no problem with it. I don't think that, Maryland needed another touchdown by any means. The difference in 44-7 and 37-7, not that much. Tom wants to know if I've noticed a change in Marcus Freeman in press conferences. He seems to have changed for the better. Thoughts on that? I guess go ahead, Jess. What do you think about this? Because you watch and listen as well.
I think he's been more confident, honestly, to be honest with you. It feels like he's speaking with a little bit more clarity and less uncertainty. I feel like, but I think that's easier to do when you're winning games, right? Because it's naturally like it's just easier to do those things. So I just feel like there's been a little bit more confidence and clarity in what he's saying and less kind of unknown, or like if he doesn't know something, he tends to give like a very, you know, non-answer basically. And I feel like you're seeing less of that now. I think he's confidently saying, what he wants to say, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I don't disagree with that. I do think that you hear maybe because he's been at it a little bit longer. I do think, like, to me, it feels like we do hear more coach speak from him than maybe we used to in the first couple of years, just because he's kind of, again, it's like part of that process. You're learning how to be a head coach, and you're kind of, like, kind of burying the things that you want to bury, address the things that you want to address. I do think that he has seemed really since Northern Illinois, like you have seen a guy who's maybe even more, forceful at the podium, more direct at the podium when he wants to be, those kind of things. So I don't know if that completely answers, Tom's question, but I think that there is at least a little bit different demeanor that we've seen from Marcus Freeman over the course of this season. You still there, Jess?
Yeah, still here, just trying to figure out a way to steady my camera. Tired of holding this.
Do you have something that you can prop it up against, perhaps?
Well, it doesn't help that the phone is charging right now.
This whole thing, man.
If we're being honest.
Oh man, I don't even know. Like this whole show so far. Brian Kelly defenders.
I blame Vince. This is his usual day. My internet just isn't used to functioning at this time on this.
Maybe that's it. Your internet just doesn't know what to do on Wednesdays at 5:00. Maybe that's
it's usually taking a break at this point, so I don't blame it.
I guess. Salty says Brian Kelly defenders, admittedly a small group, say that he won't be fired if he was highly ranked. Oh, if he has highly ranked recruiting classes. How damaging is the Underwood flip?
I don't think it's ever a great thing to lose a big time quarterback commit amidst some struggles, but I think I think Brian Kelly is fine. I don't think he's going to be fired. I think he's got a little bit more on the leash. But I think these next 2 years really are going to be really, telling for Brian Kelly. But for now, I would say he's pretty safe.
Yeah, I don't think that it puts him necessarily in jeopardy directly, but in terms of the next couple years for, for him and the performance of LSU specifically, it's not going to help him very much. Come on, like even though Underwood is going to Michigan, didn't everyone get a pretty good chuckle of the fact that Michigan was able to flip him from LSU? And just imagining, the shades of purple that Brian Kelly must have been turning in his office or in his den or whatever after getting that news. Everyone had to be feeling pretty good about that, right?
Yeah. Did you see him talking to Paul Feinbaum the other day?
So I did not see that, but I just saw a quote that someone threw up from him on our boards. Maybe this is what, are you talking about some comments that he made about the college football playoff and strength of schedule and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, basically it was like wins aren't the only thing that matter when you have a strength of schedule like this.
Here's what he said. I went on record earlier in the season saying that this is where it's going to be difficult this year because I don't know that the walking orders of the committee are going to be quite right because you're going to have teams that are going to have tougher strengths of schedules and have better football teams. They may get left out. More wins doesn't mean you're a better football team. So is he just defending his team, Or is he also throwing some shade back up here up north because, Marcus Freeman has...
I think it's a little bit of both.
That's what I think too.
I think it's a typical Brian Kelly kind of statement of what can I say to save myself, but also throw people under the bus at the same time.
Yes, that's exactly right.
It is a vintage, formula for how Brian Kelly formulates or puts together these sentences. It's part one, what can I say to discredit someone else? And part two, what can I say to make myself look better?
It's a tough schedule. It's, I wanted to be in the AFC East, so I came to LSU or the American League East. So now, I'm in the American League East, and it's tough and everything. It's like the odds are always stacked against Brian Kelly, no matter where he is, because he's always got to turn it.
They're always out to get Brian Kelly.
Yeah, everyone's out to get Brian Kelly. It's just always tougher for Brian Kelly everywhere he is. So, ultimately, I don't think any of it does, any of the Underwood thing doesn't do Kelly any favors. Look, there was a lot of money at play. According to the dad, Underwood, over the course of his time at Michigan, is going to make over $15 million from this whole thing. So, Kelly can, whatever with that. The bottom line with Kelly in the nobody made him go to LSU, obviously, but he thought he was going to go to LSU and have all these resources, and life was going to be easier down there. The grass was going to be greener. So, but I definitely think he was throwing some shade up there and also trying to make himself look better in any way that he could. Bob says, Freeman said today, apparently he thinks the quarterback for next season is already on this team's roster. What say you? I'm going to save that for rapid fire.
Why?
Actually,
I wanted to answer that right now.
You want to do that right now?
No, I was just giving you a hard time.
All right.
There's 50 different segments today, so I'm sure we'll hit it at some point.
Yes, and that's the other thing. Jesse, with his off and on internet, is also mad at me for trying to pack too much content into this show.
It's Mailbag, don't you know?
As a listener, are you dissatisfied if we bring you more content or less content? Come on.
You know the answer to that question.
But I actually pulled the audio about the comment about the quarterback, so I was going to save that. So, Salty, does IB have a Medal of Valor for service above and beyond? Ray Harton has held a forward position at Tiger Bait and bombs them daily. I have no idea I know the Tiger Bait LSU thing, but I don't know about the Medal of Valor. Does that just mean that he's lobbing stuff at Driscoll, basically? Is that what that is?
I'm not sure. Your guess would be better than mine.
Salty says the great one has passed multiple times in high school, shortest for 25 yards, some for touchdowns, QBR 179.9. Do opponents prepare for plays someone did in high school?
No, I don't think so. That you would. I don't think you would prepare for something like that. You might, if it's someone. I think the only way you would know about something like that, or maybe just have an idea of like, hey, let's watch out for a trick play, is, oftentimes if it's someone that you might have been recruiting or have knowledge of at a different school, and now it's, a couple of years down the road, you could say, hey, when I played against this guy, or when I was recruiting this guy on film, he did X, Y, and Z. He's a quarterback, so we know he has the potential to be athletic. Just something to be, aware of when you see if he's getting a reverse or some sort of, trick play, just to keep that in the back of your mind. And that honestly went all the way back to high school and college scouting reports that a part of teams that I were on, is you just kind of had some general notes underneath the guy when you were going through scouting report. And that might be something, that's in his scouting report, but I don't think it's something that you're like taking time to, necessarily go over or prepare for.
Right. Because especially, I think if you happen to recruit the same guy, you're going to have some knowledge, and you might go, I remember this, when we were looking at film on this guy, or when we were talking to that guy, or that kind of thing. But I don't think that they're going to dig that deeply on, especially a freshman, early in his career. And I mean, obviously Jaden Greathouse is not a freshman now, but don't get me, but I don't think that they're going to dig that deep. We in and we out from Shannon. Jesse's internet goes out before rapid fire, and Sean has to do it by himself. I mean, it's feeling like it's leading that direct. Oh, there we go. It's flashing off and on right before my eyes. Now, Salty has some questions about today's signing class.
That's another 30-minute segment.
Yeah, and I mean, is this is a little bit of a blind spot for both of us. I will just say I'm excited about like which of the commitments has us most excited, which has the best chance of playing immediately. I think that especially the immediacy of play, a lot of it has to do with need and opportunity, just like Anthony Knapp. Anthony Knapp wasn't going to be playing this year if Charles Jagasaw doesn't get hurt in training camp, right? So a lot of that with freshmen has to do with that. And as fired up as you get about any of these guys, it's just so hard to predict, like they are bringing in 6 guys in the secondary, and the secondary is thin right now. So I would say like guys in the secondary are probably going to have a pretty good opportunity next year. I'm pretty fired up about getting Madden Farrow. And when you look at like the direction that this linebacker room continues to go, that gets me pretty excited. I don't know how quickly he's going to be able to play though, just because of like, look at the talent that he's got sitting there already. All of those guys who are pretty young right now who are out there playing. But I mean, like KVA showed, and like they showed with that linebacker room this year with that 5-man rotation, if he shows that he can cut it right away, I could at least see him being part of the rotation next year. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I haven't studied the recruiting class too much yet today. I had a lot of kind of other work going on, and I did like the guy that you mentioned that they flipped from USC. I liked that they were able to flip that quarterback from Clemson after what went down with Deuce Vaughn. So I like some of this stuff. I actually had maybe I could find a way to pull it up, but there's like this really cool graph that I found based off of this account that I follow that like puts in comparison, basically Marcus Freeman's recruiting classes compared to, Notre Dame's recruiting classes over the last 10 or 15 years. And this one still rates very well. Even though I think a lot of people were down on it, it definitely wasn't as good as 24 and 23, but it still has a lot of overall value. So, and I think the best thing and the most refreshing thing that I saw is this season, especially, is it doesn't matter if you're a freshman, a sophomore, or whatever. If you're good, you're going to get on the field and you're going to, find a way to kind of get into this rotation. It's college football, and especially, what I've seen out of Notre Dame this season, outside of like quarterback and offensive line, every position has a rotation. Running back has a rotation. Wide receivers have a rotation. Defensive line, linebackers have a rotation. The secondary has had a rotation, to a degree. That's thinned out because of some injuries and some people deciding to leave the team. But if you're good enough as a freshman, you're going to play because Notre Dame plays a lot of positions at 2 deep and 3 deep. So if you're a young time, or if you're one of these recruits, that's something to feel good about because you can step on the field and play immediately, right? There's no I gotta wait or wait my turn or anything like that. And I think that's one of the best changes I've seen as well with Marcus Freeman in comparison to Brian Kelly.
Well, and this because of the recruiting that this whole thing ties into, on yesterday's show, we were talking about, does Notre Dame need to sign Marcus Freeman to an extension right now? And we talked about a lot of different aspects of that, about the timing, about the leverage that Marcus Freeman has because of the Chicago Bears stuff, because of the fact that there's all this smoke going on with, Ohio State and all that kind of thing. And where did it go? I just had it here. Someone, Frank on the YouTube channel says, why? What has he accomplished? Recruiting is underwhelming. Losses to much lesser talented teams, has choked in big moments. Yes, he's a nice guy, but who cares? He's definitely a better person than Brian Kelly, but that's a low bar. True. If he coaches good in the playoffs and we go far and don't get blown out, then I think the possibility to extend. But, so he's.
What do you mean he doesn't recruit well?
And that's, look at the freshmen and sophomores for that matter, the amount of young guys who are significant contributors on this team this season, starting with Anthony Knapp, a true freshman, like even Charles Jagasaw for that matter, like he obviously wasn't a true freshman, but he was a redshirt freshman. Essentially, he would have started there at that tackle position. And then look at Boubacar Traore, look at Leonard Moore, look at Christian Gray, even, who's just a sophomore. Look at Drake Bowen, who's just a sophomore. Look at KVA, who's obviously a true freshman. Look at all these young studs and how much they have contributed to this team being a college football playoff team. And I just, and again, like you can look at overall rankings of the classes and all that stuff. And, like if that's what you're going to base it on, then of course, you're going to say, well, he hasn't made that much of a dent in recruiting. But you've got to look at the product that's out there on the field and see these guys who have been part of his recruiting classes, who are directly responsible for the results that they're getting out there on the field right now. And if you go back and look at that blue chip ratio, which is the percentage of 4 and 5 star guys in your recruiting classes, you compare the blue chip ratios that Freeman has had to Brian Kelly's classes, it's not even comparable. Marcus Freeman blows him out of the way. They are far and away getting a more consistent level of high-end talent. It might not be elite talent, but you've got to remember that there's more than just the ability to be a good recruiter that plays into that. There's a lot of money that's changing hands these days as well. And look, if all you want to look at as well is the ranking of the recruiting class, if Deuce Knight doesn't decide to start shopping himself around and go take a bigger bag of money from someplace else, then this recruiting class ranking would have been a lot higher as well, because it would have included, an elite quarterback. As it turned out, they got a good quarterback still, but if Deuce Knight is still part of this class, the recruiting class ranking is going to be considerably. It's going to be about 8 to 10, ranking spots higher than what it turned out to be.
I definitely agree, and I think another thing you have to take into consideration is, with the transfer portal and the NIL era, more guys are. I think a lot of these schools are losing more and more recruits because guys are going to where's paying them and where they can play now, right? And so I think, when you're comparing these recruiting classes to maybe like Brian Kelly 10 years ago, or not, maybe even 5 years ago, like the transfer portal and the NIL were not a factor. And I think you're going to get less and less. You're not going to be able to stockpile as many 4 and 5 star recruits because of that's just the nature of college football right now. More of these players are dispersed amongst, more teams, more Power 4 schools. And so I think that just leads to, overall, again, less stockpile of these 4 and 5 stars. And I think that's why it's important. And what we've seen this year with all these freshmen playing, you just have to hit. It's I don't think it's a matter of the quantity. It's really down to the quality at this point. And does that quality translate to playing now and helping your team win now? And if you can't knock Marcus Freeman for that this season, because look at all the freshmen that are making an impact that you can say got them to this 11-1 season in this playoff season. And that's because of Marcus Freeman's recruiting at the end of the day.
Completely agree on all of that. Andrew wants to know thoughts on UCF pursuing Lincoln Riley.
No, that's not happening.
They might want him. Like, could you see Lincoln Riley?
No.
I can't either.
No, that's a demotion.
Yeah. He's in a conference, he would obviously go to the Big 12 and have a better chance to win the Big 12, I think, than where he is at USC. But you're absolutely right. It's a complete demotion. That's the kind of job where you would just be looking to have some short-term success and then bounce someplace else ultimately. Because no matter what happens, UCF, they can be happy about the fact that they're in a Power 4 conference and it's Orlando and all that stuff. But they're always going to, at best, be the 4th best school in the state of Florida. That's just, now obviously, again, like they might have a better season, here and there than, year in, year out than Florida, like if you just look at their record, but it's just they're always they're not even second fiddle.
Gus Malzahn literally just quit to go be an offensive coordinator for Florida State.
Right.
Why is Lincoln Riley, the head coach of USC, going to quit to go be the head coach of UCF?
Yeah, I don't see it. Shannon, seating aside, what's your ideal matchup for the Irish in the first round? He says he would love Penn State at Notre Dame Stadium, Snow Bowl 2.0. What do you think?
This is such a. I think I want Notre Dame to avoid Ohio State, Tennessee, Texas. I'm okay with Penn State, SMU, IU, and Alabama is still a toss-up in my opinion.
I mean, Alabama would be a great game. It would be a lot of fun to have Notre Dame and Alabama at Notre Dame Stadium. But I'm also like, be careful what you wish for when you start talking about who do you want your opponent to be? Because
there's just still a lot of talent on that roster.
They're all going to be good teams, no matter what. Like if I had to choose, I would probably I might agree with this, Andrew. But
are we doing excitement, or are we doing what gives Notre Dame the most favorable matchup?
Right, and do you really want to see all that red inside Notre Dame Stadium if it's Indiana? Because of where we are, you're going to see a lot of Hoosiers fans, because it's going to be a once in a lifetime situation for Indiana. Now, based on the way Indiana's offense performed against Ohio State, I would not fear Indiana, but at the same time, do you want the matchup? Do you want the best? The only reason I don't like the Indiana matchup again is because you're going to have so much red inside the stadium. I think that's pretty much guaranteed because of.
Listen, if it's IU, I bought my ticket for $400 the other day. If it's IU, I guarantee that price skyrockets. 2 in-state schools, playoff, that price would go nuts.
Joe put a question in here, and I think he might have had one earlier, and it kind of slipped by before I could start the first time. I don't know if you're repeating this, Joe. And we're going to have a bunch of college football playoff stuff at the start of rapid fire here in a minute. But Joe says, do colleges reveal what NIL deals are? Is there a resource out there that tracks it? No and no. They pretty much all keep it as close to the vest as possible so that they can't be held accountable, I think, for anything, is kind of the deal. Right?
I'll take your word for it. It would make sense. You don't want numbers.
I mean, this is one of the things that Jack Swarbrick wanted. He wanted there to be transparency, like every NIL deal. He was talking about this a couple of years ago, that there needs to be like a national registry where you have to show what you were giving these, like the exact amount, where the money's coming from, and all that kind of stuff. But that's one of the many problems with what we've got right now, with the system that we've got right now.
I love this system.
Is that there is no accountability.
You're just being a hater. I like this system.
You like the system? You like throwing the money around and no one has to know where it's going?
No law and order, baby.
The wild, wild west. Okay, so there are a few college football playoff type questions that are related to what we're going to talk about. I talked about the quarterback question earlier, so let's just do it. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Oh, buddy, this is I told you I got stressed out about this, but let's do it.
Jesse got stressed out, what? Because I kept adding like so many more questions to rapid fire today?
I got stressed because this was my topic, and then last night when the rankings were revealed, I was sitting there and I was like, there are so many different combinations that can happen.
Yeah, I
need to narrow down and be broad here of what things can be the most impactful.
Yes. We're going to start with the quarterback thing, though. We'll start light, and then we'll jump with both feet into the whole conference championship game results and stuff like that. So Marcus Freeman asked today about going to the transfer portal for another quarterback this offseason. Here's what he said.
I said that, I think, during the season. It made we have no plans on going to transfer portal for a quarterback. I feel really strong about the guys we have in our quarterback room right now with Steve and Kenny and CJ. All possess different talent, all do things well, all have areas of improvement like we all do. But I feel really strong about the quarterback room as a whole. And adding Blake, really a guy that presents almost a dual threat, a guy that can extend plays with his legs, has a really good arm. What I love most about Blake and our really the short time and being able to get to know each other is his competitive spirit, his leadership. You don't have to be in a room long with him to understand the leadership values that I believe quarterbacks must have. And he definitely possesses that leadership, a competitive spirit that we look for.
And what he's talking about, Blake, that's Blake Aber there that he was talking about at the end, but no plans to go to the transfer portal. We had people earlier this week saying, go get Miller Moss out of there from USC, bring him in. Are we satisfied, Jesse? No plans to go to the portal for a third straight year for Marcus Freeman.
Yeah, I am going to be satisfied with this one because I think Kenny Minchie is going to be the starting quarterback, and I think he has all of the necessary tools to run a Mike Denbrock offense. And I think now is the best time to put the foot in the ground and say, we are fully going to commit to developing quarterbacks. This is something that, Marcus Freeman took head on after taking over, kind of the abysmal situation that Brian Kelly left him. And I think it was necessary to go to the portal these last couple of years just because there wasn't a true answer. And you can't let down the rest of the talent on the team. But some of these quarterbacks have now been in the room for at least a year and a few going on 2 or 3 years. So someone has to be ready at this point. I think it's full on development. And I'm excited to see it because it could go really well or it could go really wrong. And they might, have to reevaluate again after next season.
And this is how, look, if you want to, like we were just talking about, if this recruiting class included Deuce Knight, it would be ranked several points, ranking spots higher, in the national recruiting rankings. This is how you get the whole thing going, and you make sure that you're continuing to attract elite quarterbacks and, have that level of quarterback in there from your own program is by going with your own guys. Like Andrew says, big mistake. Everyone knows Angeli is not the answer. So why didn't they give Carr or Minchie any reps? Look, for one, Carr, hurt his elbow in October. We don't know the exact extent of that. So it's not like he was going to get out there and get any reps. As for Minchie, I think that if they felt like Kenny Minchie was ahead of Steve Angeli this year, he would have been out there getting those number 2 reps. I think they'll be fine ultimately. Like, are you overly concerned because neither Minchie nor Carr got the kind of actual game reps that Steve Angeli had that that's going to hold them back in any way going toward next year?
No, because Steve Angeli was the best fit for if something went absolutely wrong this season, because I think he has the maturity and the ability to, he might not have that wow presence or plays maybe that Carr and Minchie have. But if something catastrophic were to happen to the starting quarterback, I just think Angeli provides the most, maturity, the calmness, and the ability to kind of re-steer the ship. There would still be a chance if Steve Angeli was the quarterback. I would just say, there would be less of a chance if CJ Carr or Kenny Minchie was the quarterback. But I think that can change going into this offseason. That's the biggest time for young players or, especially young quarterbacks to make their move. Essentially, is you got to do it in the offseason because again, once the season starts, there's really not going to be a whole lot of shifting of the quarterback roster. It is what it is basically, because that's what the coaching staff is comfortable with. Again, if something were to happen, they would be more comfortable with Angeli.
Andrew says it's a big leap to go from the practice squad to the first team in
Right.
12 months. But, you could see it factor dripping out of every pore that CJ Carr had when we got to see him in the spring, right? Like, this is a guy who is ready between the ears. He's ready physically. So I'm not as concerned about that. And, like, I don't know where Johnny Manziel and Jameis Winston were on the depth chart in their true freshman seasons, but they both won. And I'm not saying CJ Carr is going to win a Heisman next year. Those guys both won Heisman trophies after being redshirted their true freshman year. They were redshirt freshmen when they first started, and they both won Heisman trophies that year. Now, again, I don't know exactly where they were on the depth chart coming out of that, but it worked out for those guys because they were both very talented, and they were both ready to go. And I feel like, especially watching CJ Carr, I'm not concerned about his preparedness heading toward next year. Like that's the last thing that I'm worried about.
I mean, when this season ends at, the midway, almost, end of January, he'll have February, March, April, May, June, July, August. He's got 6 to 7 months of, growth and ability. That's the biggest chunk when guys want to, really make their move on the depth chart, is what are you doing in that 6-month window in the off season?
Andrew says, but why not get a veteran quarterback to compete against Carr? Well,
I
two
think
things.
they will.
I don't know. I don't know that they do, because, like, two things there. One, they have a veteran quarterback if Steve Angeli does stay, who's going to compete against Carr. Two, if you bring in a veteran quarterback and CJ Carr wins the job, like if this is a guy who's been playing someplace else and you bring him in, he doesn't win the job, CJ Carr is the guy, then you're going to have a very disgruntled member of your team, in that quarterback room, who's going to be the number 2 at best all season.
I hear you. What do we think of the new propped up hands-free setting?
It's looking good. It's looking good.
Volume's good.
It's working for you so far.
All right. Just checking. I don't want to, not make everyone happy on this super segment day.
Decaf wants to know where Vince is. You'll have to ask Vince that. Didn't he have like a wrestling meet or something that he had to go work tonight?
Vince only has conflicts on the days he's supposed to work, okay? I've lost track.
That's right. Vince is not here. Vince will be here tomorrow. So you've got that going for you. Okay, so conference championship games coming up this weekend. And of course, we got college football playoff rankings last night. And like you said, you were wringing your hands. You came up with this idea. You're like, even before the rankings came out, you're like, we need to look at these conference championship games and see which ones impact Notre Dame potentially the most. Because as of the official rankings and the way the bracket, if everything goes chalk this weekend, Notre Dame, of course, is the 6th seed, hosting 11 seed Alabama. Penn State would be the 5 seed, hosting 12 seed Arizona State. Then you've got Oregon at 1, Texas at 2, SMU 3, Boise at 4. That's if everything goes to chalk. So how do you want to do this? Like, which results do you think most likely impact Notre Dame for starters?
Okay. So let's get this one out of the way right now. Let's do Oregon and Penn State. If Oregon wins, I think the only way you have to look at this is how can Notre Dame jump, or who can affect the shuffling behind Notre Dame of teams. I say the only way Notre Dame jumps is if Oregon just dismantles Penn State like 35-0.
I agree.
And so let's not get into the nonsense of, but what if Oregon wins, but they win by like 2 touchdowns? Let's just assume Penn State stays where they are unless they get absolutely throttled by Oregon. And then if Penn State does win, I think that Oregon and Penn State just flip-flop their spots. So I think that takes care of itself.
That's exactly it. If Penn State beats Oregon, Oregon is just going to be the number 5 seed. Notre Dame has no chance to move into the 5 seed. And really, if Texas loses as well, like, they're going to be the 5
ahead of Notre Dame.
Because we ran it. If Georgia beats Texas and Penn State beats Oregon, Oregon is most likely going to be the 5 seed. Texas in that instance would most likely be the 6 seed.
Correct.
and how that affects the rest of things. So Notre Dame would slide down to the 7 seed. And in that case, the opponent would most likely be Indiana as the 10 seed, because Alabama would stay the 11s. And this is assuming SMU wins, obviously, and Boise wins. Like if Oregon or Texas lose, at least one of the higher seeded, which right now would be Oregon, is just going to slide to the 5 seed. Penn State most likely would slide to the 6 if both of them end up losing.
And that's correct. So I think what you have to focus on after that point is, again, what can cause the shuffling behind Notre Dame? And I think the next question that comes, or the next major impact that needs to be brought up, is if Clemson beats SMU, does SMU hold on to that 11 seed and knock down Alabama?
Correct. Because if Clemson wins, then you've got you've presently, I had the rankings all mapped out. I think SMU is number 8 right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they are number 8. So does SMU fall behind Alabama? Do they fall all the way out if Clemson ends up winning?
And that's a tough one to me, because this isn't like it's a 1-loss or an undefeated Clemson team. This is a 3-loss Clemson team. And so I think that has to be considered in this SMU conversation is, yes, you lost in a conference championship, but you lost to a team that already has 2 losses more than you at this point. So, how deserving are you when you're being compared to another 3-loss Alabama team, right? So Clemson and Alabama both have 3 losses, but Bama's ranked ahead of Clemson right now. So if SMU loses and they lose bad to Clemson, I don't know if they hang on to that last spot.
Yeah, I went through and, we did a few different scenarios. Like if this happened, like I said, we've got like if everything holds to chalk, which is what, they showed on TV last night. Now,
you want to do the big upset bracket?
So the first one that I ran was, what if every conference championship game ended up being an upset? So that would mean Georgia beats Texas, which, technically it's an upset, but Georgia's already beaten Texas once. That would mean Penn State beats Oregon. That would mean Iowa State beats Arizona State. That would mean UNLV beats Boise State. And that would also mean that Clemson beats SMU. So the all upset bracket would look like this. Penn State would be the number 1 seed. Georgia would be number 2. Iowa State would end up being the number 3 because they are ranked ahead of Clemson right now.
Right.
Clemson would be the number 4, and UNLV as the Mountain West champion
12.
would be the 12 seed. Now, that's another question is, do you think is Boise, does Boise have to win the Mountain West to get in? I think the winner, but there's only one bid going to the Mountain West, right?
Yeah, there's no way Boise. Yeah, you're not given 2 spots to the group of 5, and 2 spots to. Okay, let me put it like this: you're not given 2 spots to the group of 5 and only 1 spot to the ACC.
Correct. I think so as well. So Oregon, and this again is the all upset conference championship game weekend. Oregon would be the 5 seed against 12 seed UNLV. Texas would end up as the 6 seed against number 11 Indiana. Notre Dame would be the 7 seed against 10th seeded SMU. And then the 8-9 game would be Ohio State and Tennessee. And what's most interesting about this whole thing is no matter where the upsets are, with all these different things that we ran, Ohio State and Tennessee are always going to play each other as the 8-9
And so
seed.
that was the number one thing I had to do last night, was just basically leave the teams that aren't playing idle. And I think that's the best kind of way to ultimately look at this whole thing. But that's an interesting, that all upset bracket is interesting. But I think what's ultimately going to happen is you're going to have a mix of, people, the favorites to win. I think a couple upsets are going to be sprinkled in there. And I think the upsets that affect Notre Dame the most is Clemson beating SMU and Boise State losing, because it's where do those teams fall back, and do they bump out
a team that's already on the edge, essentially? Do they hang on and cause that reshuffling behind Notre Dame? Because, like you said, if Penn State or if Oregon or Texas lose, they're just going to be lumped in front of Notre Dame, right? And so, again, that might help because that pushes Notre Dame into a different seed. But I would lean more so on Clemson beating SMU and UNLV beating Boise because, again, where do those teams kind of fall to? Where do they hang on to behind Notre Dame? Because that's likely where, if they fall in there, it's likely they're going to fall into a spot where Notre Dame could play them.
Yes. The only way it appears that Notre Dame is going to move up to the number 5 seed is Texas needs to beat Georgia because Georgia is obviously behind Notre Dame, and Oregon basically needs to thump Penn State.
It needs to be like that what was it? Ohio State and like Michigan State, or like Ohio State versus Northwestern Big Ten championship.
It needs to be like a 4 touchdown spread, I think, right? Like at least 4 touchdowns probably.
Exactly. They have to look absolutely brutal, I think, and not, give up a lot of points and not do a lot on offense.
So Reese Davis on the show on the selection or the, announcement show, whatever, asked Warde Manuel about what chances teams like Ole Miss, South Carolina, and BYU, who are sitting outside the top 12 right now, what chances they would have to move in based on what happens in the conference championship game. Now, there was some confusion with this about, Warde Manuel said none of the teams who are idle can't move up. But here's what Warde Manuel had to say in response to the question Reese Davis had about these teams that are outside the top 12 right now, potentially moving up. Like, could Clemson essentially give a team like South Carolina a boost if they win?
But in terms of those who are playing, how they'll move, if they'll move at all, if you remember 2 years ago, TCU lost in their conference championship game and didn't move. They stayed at 3. So we could do that, or we could adjust depending on the outcomes of the game.
Okay, so I want to make sure, and I want to give you a chance to clarify to make sure that we're on the same page here. So absent one of the lower-ranked teams, Clemson, UNLV, stealing a bid, as it were, then nothing would change that would move Miami, Ole Miss, South Carolina in a different order or ahead of Alabama.
Any team that is not playing right now, we don't have a data point to rearrange where we have those teams ranked. And so that is set in terms of how we see them going into the final week of championship week. There's nothing that's going to change, Reese, for us to evaluate them any differently than we have now. Those teams who are not playing cannot be adjusted in terms of where they are compared to other teams that are not playing. But the championship teams, we will evaluate that data point to determine if there needs to be any movement based on how the performance of the game goes.
Okay, so they're, kind of from what I understand, he explained it a little bit better in a conference call afterwards. Go ahead, Jess.
I just have to say, I hate when Reese Davis just asks him all these hypothetical questions right off the rip. It's like, dude, I
think last night he had to because there was only a 30-minute show last night. They didn't, so I think he felt like he had to get in what he thought were the most important questions. But go ahead.
There are so many different combinations and hypotheticals that can happen, and I understand where he's coming from, but I just don't appreciate the instant grill of, but if this happens,
right?
How does it affect these teams? And immediately he's like, well, that's not, it's like this fair thing, and it's like, well, one, let's let the games play out, and two, they have their rationale, they are still grading everyone under the same parameters, and so I like the response that he gave. Basically, teams that aren't playing aren't necessarily, they don't have the ability to jump anyone unless someone in front of them, something drastically happens. Basically, what he's saying is these games are going to be an eye test. If these are close games and a team loses, they're not going to be penalized because they're playing an extra game against another top team.
And that's, to Decaf's point, and Vince backs this point up as well. Decaf says, I don't think so. Penn State loses, Notre Dame jumps them, period. That's not what Warde Manuel said last night.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah. And like what he used you heard him. He used the TCU example from a couple of years ago. They lost in the Big 12 championship game, but their seed was unchanged because they played the extra game. And so that's what he's saying. And that's why it's not just as simple as if Penn State loses, Notre Dame's going to jump them. Look, I get it. Everyone, around Notre Dame and Notre Dame fans think that Notre Dame is better than Penn State. I think Notre Dame is better than Penn State. But based on, the way it was explained last night and based on the way this committee has ranked things, Notre Dame is not going to move ahead of Penn State if Penn State plays a close game against Oregon. I just don't think it's going to happen. Again, should they and will they are two completely different conversations. And the will they is, I just don't think that's going to happen. I think Penn State's going to have to lose a very lopsided game against Oregon for Notre Dame to move past them based on everything that Manuel said last night.
It's got to be, I like the number you put. It's got to be at minimum 3 touchdowns for me.
I think so too.
To even open up the conversation.
Right. And look, again, I don't think it's we talked about the difference between the 5 seed and the 6 seed last night. I mean, as the 6 seed, potentially, you're talking about maybe, an Iowa State or SMU or Clemson. Those are the 3 seeds, potentially that you get in the second round. I wouldn't be opposed to that if you're Notre Dame as the 6th seed. That's what you'd have to face in your second round game. And most the 3 opponents that Notre Dame is most likely to face, one of the 3 is Alabama, SMU, or Indiana. Just depending on how these things shuffle
I would
out.
be willing to bet a lot of money that if you gave me those 3 opponents and said, what are the odds Notre Dame's going to play one of these 3, I would put a heavily considerable amount of money on it, because I even think it's most likely going to be, I think you could get rid of IU. I think it's really SMU or Alabama, because the one with IU would require, I think, a little bit more upset.
Well, the one with IU is if Georgia and Penn State both win and everybody else.
And I consider Penn State beating Oregon a pretty big upset.
DK has a question for you. You think a number 3 team should lose to number 1 by 14 points, and that is okay? It doesn't matter what we think. It's what the committee thinks.
I'm just giving you rational, a rational approach. Yeah, I think it takes.
They're saying that this is an extra game that these teams have to play in the conference championship game. So ultimately, they're playing to see who gets the bye, and there's not going to be a whole lot of shuffling beyond that. It doesn't sound like. Right.
And yeah. And again, I think it just goes back to the eye test. If Penn State looks horrible, they can't move the ball, they can't stop anyone, and they get blown out, then yeah, I think that's enough to be like, you know what? We've been on the fringe about Penn State and Notre Dame. Penn State didn't really do much to keep it close. Notre Dame is probably the better team right now. So yeah, it's gonna take more than a touchdown loss, a 2 touchdown loss. You got to get into the 20, 30 point range, I think, for Penn State to be jumped.
I think so as well. Joe says, I'm missing the point. The committee's trying to kill the ACC and they want as many Big Ten teams as possible. Well, I'm not missing the point. I mean, I've said this many times, going back to October, the Big Ten and the SEC commissioners have made it pretty publicly clear that the future of what the college football playoff looks like and how hard the SEC and the Big Ten are going to push this thing in different directions going forward is going to be based on how many teams they get in. I mean, it's an overt thing. It's nobody's hiding anything. The SEC and the Big Ten have made it very clear that they think that they should have as many teams in this playoff as possible. At least the SEC has shown that, when you look at the case for Alabama, for example, and you look at even potentially the case for Ole Miss, some of these 3-loss teams, I mean, there's more of a case for them, right? And the Big Ten, look, why does everybody doubt Penn State? Because they didn't have to play the kind of schedule that Alabama or Ole Miss or Georgia had to play.
Listen, I don't understand. If you think a 2-loss Miami team deserves to be in over a 3-loss Alabama team, then I don't think we're going to get anywhere in an argument, because it's just not. You can't tell me that, because Miami has, first of all, no defense. All they can do is score a bunch of points. They have 2 losses, and you could go look at their schedule in some of these games, and they could easily have 3 or 4 losses. They barely escaped some of these games. And everyone wants to bring up, well, Alabama lost to a 6-win team. All of these teams that are being considered have some sort of probably bad loss on their resume, like Notre Dame has NIU, like a lot of the SEC and Big 12, they have a lot of losses to 6-loss teams. I don't think that's something that should be held against, Alabama. And it's like, even the team that beat them, they beat some other good teams, like that's just the nature, I think, of where football is right now, is like, it's kind of, at the end of the day, the survival of the fittest. And then, looking at current records, they said last night Alabama has a 3-1 record against current top 25 teams right now. And so I know the next counter argument will be, well, they set it up that way to justify their argument for Alabama. And it's just, I don't agree with that either. I just think Alabama has played a harder schedule, and they have a better record against top 25 teams. And to me, that weighs more than the extra loss than they have on their resume.
I agree. Like, I don't think that Miami is a better football team than Alabama.
And that's genuinely what it comes down to. And I don't think so either.
Like, you might not like Alabama. I don't like Alabama. I don't like Miami either. But I don't think Miami is a better football team than Alabama. Miami doesn't have a defense, and they're basically a one-man team. And that's how you lose games to Georgia Tech and to Syracuse at the end of the season, right? Like, if we were making this argument between, if Notre Dame was in some kind of argument, conversation with Miami, I know that nobody would be pushing for Miami at this point, right? Like, I'm sorry. Where was the question that I saw? There it is. DK says it has nothing to do with Penn State's schedule. They look bad against teams like Minnesota. They might look bad, but they still won. And that's, like, Ohio State can't say that with losing to a 500 Michigan team, right? Like, they still won. I agree that Notre Dame should be ranked ahead of Penn State. Don't get me wrong, but I'm telling you, like, this is how the committee is backing up their arguments. They're still winning these games. And that's also what makes this thing all the more impressive. Like, when you look at Notre Dame and the fact that they had that loss in week 2 and they won 10 straight games. When you look at all these teams that got tripped up over the last month and who are, in these battles right now to save their lives. And, SMU is kind of in the same boat because they lost early to BYU. Like, they managed to keep winning. And it is going to be interesting to see what happens, because that's going to be the other part of it as well. Does SMU stay in it if they lose to Clemson? Because it's probably going to be them or Alabama. And I think someone said, like, if SMU gets blown out, Andrew might have said it, if SMU gets blown out, that could be Miami's chance to get back in. And that probably is the only chance, is if somehow Clemson blows out SMU.
Well, even if, I think Alabama would stay ahead because Clemson gets the top 4 bid.
Right. Clemson would stay ahead, but Miami could also move back ahead if SMU gets blown out.
There was a scenario where Miami could sneak in. I just can't remember what it was.
I think that's probably it, is SMU getting blown out. So Reese Davis says the committee needs to change the seeding and not give the automatic buys to the top 4 conference champions next year. Now, this is something he's been talking about for a while. He brought it up again last night. He says instead they need to just rank the top 12 teams and seed them strictly by merit. Don't give, teams will still get buys, but the buys would go to the 4 most deserving, the 4 best teams, and not simply the team, the 4 highest seeded teams that win their conference tournament. And his rationale is the current format puts the number 1 seed at a disadvantage because the number 5 seed is likely going to be one of the top teams that have lost a conference championship game, or a team like Notre Dame that's more deserving of a higher seed but lands at number 5 because of the way this system is set up. So do you buy or sell Davis's rationale?
I buy it, but that means you got to eliminate conference championship games. There's no reason to play conference championship games if you don't want them to have any impact. And so basically what this comes down to is conferences and TV deals don't want to give these games away because of the revenue it generates. And so the college football committee is forced to find a way to reward these conference championships. And that means the first round bye and the first 4 seeds being gone. And so I understand what Reese Davis is saying, but you just need to say that you're advocating for no conference championships then,
right,
and just give regular season titles, because that is what he's saying. If you don't have these conference championships, then you don't have the reward of giving the first 4 seeds and the bye. So get rid of the conference championships. But now you got to go to conferences and the TV deals and say, you know what, we're going to strip you of some cash because we don't like that we have to give conference champions the top 4 seeds.
That's right.
So
I mean,
go have the conversation if that's truly what you believe.
This is how the conferences agreed to this format. And you've got to remember that switching to this format this year originally was not going to happen, but they had to get unanimous because there were still remaining years. There were still 2 years on the existing TV contract when they negotiated this thing. So to get the conferences to agree to this format, you had to give them some kind of incentive because they were going to be playing these extra games. And so you had to come up with some kind of incentive. And, again, like going back to the SEC and the Big Ten specifically, they want guarantees that they're going to have more teams involved. And they want guarantees that their teams are going to have advantages in this whole thing. And this was part of getting everyone to agree to this format. Was you've got these conference championship games. They've got to be on TV because you've got TV revenue coming through them. So that's how you're going to get it. Yeah, like pie in the sky, best case, you just seed it 1 through 12. But like you said, you've got to get rid of the conference championship games to do it. The conferences don't want to do that yet.
I'd say the only rebuttal to what we're saying right now is if instead of getting the bye, you just get the bid, right? So let's say there's a team potentially in the 11 spot, but you're like Clemson and you make a big upset. Maybe that doesn't get you a bye, but that does get you a top 12 seed. You see what I'm saying? But so you could fall in at 10, 11, 12 because maybe you're a conference champion, but you don't necessarily deserve the bye, right? So that's the only counter argument I think I could come up with is, you get a ticket to the dance, but you're not guaranteed a top 4 spot just because you win your conference championship. It'll get you in, but it doesn't get you 100% a bye either. I think that's the only other way you could look at it.
Yeah. Well, because I'm sitting here looking and let's say, again, if you just seeded it right now, Oregon would be the number 1 seed. And as of right now, the 8-9 game would be SMU, Indiana, as opposed to Ohio State, Tennessee. Again, you're disadvantaging the number 1 seed right away because of this convoluted way that you're seeding things rather than actual, straight seeding based on merit. So, SMU, Indiana versus Ohio State, Tennessee winner playing the number 1 seed in the number 1 seed's first game. And then, of course, the number 5 seed right now would be Georgia. Okay, tough opponent either way versus, Penn State potentially or Texas or whoever it happens to be. So it's a little quirk that I don't think, that everyone fully realized was going to happen. And I mean, there's complete merit to what Reese Davis is saying, but the fact is, until and if the conferences decide they're going to get rid of the conference championship games, it's just something that you're going to have to deal with. And, Notre Dame's involvement in this, since Jack Swarbrick was also negotiating it, that played into this as well. Well, Notre Dame wants to be involved in this and wants assurance that they're going to have access to this playoff. Well, you don't have to potentially play a conference championship game. So the best you're ever going to get is a 5 seed, and again, that's as we know, Notre Dame's bye week is this week. Everyone who's playing in a conference championship game has to play this weekend, and then their bye comes potentially in the first round if they're able to win those games. So it's just it's a loophole that I'm not sure that everyone completely saw coming, but it is definitely an interesting quirk in this whole system.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, is that everything can look perfect drawn on paper. Trust me, as an engineer, everything always looks perfect drawn on paper, but until someone else reviews it, until they actually get out there and start building it, playing the games, and the seeds fall where they might, it's just, you don't know what's going to be the perfect system until there's trial by error, essentially.
Exactly. So Ryan Russillo and Todd McShay were talking about Notre Dame on Russillo's podcast on the Ringer Network this weekend. Starting with Russillo, here's what they had to say about the Irish.
I love Notre Dame. I think I finally got there with it. I don't know that I'm picking them to win.
Because I was texting with Pollock yesterday, and I think he's in a similar boat. I think it's been hard to gauge how good Notre Dame is. I think they looked awesome early. They got a big win against A&M. Then it's like, oh gosh, it's not going to be a good year. Or Marcus Freeman, like him, but is this going to work with the Northern Illinois loss? And then it feels like they've steadily gotten better and better as the season's progressed. My argument is, and it's not even an argument, I guess my trepidation with Notre Dame right now is when I look at them, 2 times they had to face opponents that had good weapons and a good passing game. I think maybe not just 2, but in 2 occasions, Louisville and USC. This secondary, which is really talented, but they lost Morrison, their first round cornerback.
Right.
Are they, when they get into a playoff against a really good passing team, what's that going to look like? So that's question number 1. Question number 2 is, can they pass rush at an elite level? When you start to look at Tennessee and Georgia and South Carolina, if they get in, and Ohio State to a lesser degree, but they have talent up front.
What about Oregon's pass rush?
Good. It's good, not elite, I would say.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of it like, do you like Oregon's pass rush still more than Notre Dame's, it sounds like?
Maybe slightly. I don't think there's a huge difference, but Penn State's got a better pass rush. I'm just saying, when you combine a couple times against really good passing teams, and maybe it's pass rush and secondary together, and I think there's a lot of good talent in that secondary, but they've struggled. You can't deny that. They've given up a lot of yards, okay? Now, they had the 2 interceptions late, and they stepped up when they needed to, but USC passed the ball very successfully, right? And then the other thing is, on the flip side, the other side of the ball, the weapons concern me. Like, do they have explosive weapons on the outside? And the answer from every tape I've studied is no, they don't. And a quarterback who has gotten better as a passer this year in Riley Leonard, but they don't scare you on the perimeter. And I looked this past week, and their top 2 leaders in receiving are their tight end, Mitchell Evans, and Jeremiah Love, the running back. And so while I think they're a very, very good football team, absolutely deserve to be where they are at this point, considering what they've gone through. They, and there's been carnage everywhere else, and they've continued to kind of gradually rise up. And I think they're capable of beating a lot of teams, not all teams, but how great are they? Is because Pollock said he legitimately could see them winning a national championship. That's where I differ. I can go a long way in terms of how good they are, and I could see them winning a game, maybe 2 games. I don't know that they're a national championship team because of those 3 areas that I just touched on.
Yeah, I think I just love the O-line. I love the running backs, even though one of them went down.
The running backs are outstanding.
Yeah, and I think Riley Leonard's been really good, and then the running part of it, I think there's a toughness with them.
I did find it curious that Russillo, after watching the USC game, that's when he finally came aboard, and he said, "Oh, I just love the offensive line, and he loves the running backs." And I think that there's reason to like
that's not just that's not just him. That's kind of, Pollock was the same way. A lot of the national media was the same way. It's like it took them finishing out the season for them to be like, all right, we believe in Notre Dame because they're not going to suffer one of those fluke losses that they should have won.
That's and Jacoy, I think that's how you say it, Jacoy Johnson Cole. This is the exact thought that I had when I heard McShay. the 3 points, Notre Dame's secondary versus an elite passing team, the pass rush, and then, he says lack of explosive weapons offensively. Who has the really good passing team? Because there are good passing teams, but there are not elite passing teams that are going to be a part of this playoff.
I think Texas has an elite passing game.
I think they have explosive players.
They have really good wide receivers.
They have the potential to be, but there's some consistency issues with them as well, right? I think that every team has flaws. Like every team that's going to be in this field has more flaws than probably like the fields of 4 that we have seen when the playoff format was just 4 teams. Don't you?
So yeah, I do, and I think that that just goes back to NIL, transfer portal. There's just more parity. There's not super teams anymore. I don't think that I look at one team and I'm like, man, you can, like, maybe even Ohio State, if Ryan Day decides to open up the passing playbook, when it's time, they're honestly one of those teams that scares me because they still have Ibuka, I believe. They still have that freshman wide receiver. They have a lot of weapons on that Ohio State receiving corps. They would scare me. Texas would scare me because of some of their athletes. Oregon, I think, is just a good all-around offense, so I think that helps their passing game. But I think the number one thing to kind of take away from this is, an exercise would be, let's rank your level of concern based off of those 3 categories. I'm most concerned with Notre Dame's wide receivers. Then it would go their defensive line, and then it would go their secondary. Of those 3, I'm the least concerned with the secondary, and I'm most concerned with the wide receivers. And to say the reason why I'm most concerned with the wide receivers is because if you take away the running game and you get in a shootout, does Notre Dame have enough to move the ball downfield and make up a couple touchdowns? That's where the wide receivers would come into play. And they haven't been in that situation, that oh crap moment. They've either been playing tight games or they've been blowing people out, right? Like Texas A&M, NIU, USC, close games, but they were majority in control of those games, except, at some points versus NIU. And the rest of those games were just blowouts. And so if a team gets ahead of Notre Dame by 2 scores, I don't know if they have the wide receiver in the passing attack to make up that difference. That's where I'd get concerned. But again, that's where a good defense comes into play. But right. And then when you talk about the defensive line, I think they realize that. They're at their 3 deep, 4 deep at some of these positions. And I think that's why Al Golden creates so much pressure with his linebackers, because he's getting more athletic guys to get in there. And that's why he brings safety blitzes. That's why he brings corner blitzes.
But that was bugging you the other night against USC too. Like you were not.
I don't like when you just run them with no result, right? Like if you keep running into a wall, you can't, and a team is picking you apart in the pass. There's no reason to keep blitzing and putting Christian Gray on an island when he obviously needs some help. You're taking someone out of coverage by blitzing them. But that's going to be on Al Golden to get creative, essentially, right? Is how can I bring different pressures? Because I don't think their defensive line is tremendously great. And then when Howard Cross isn't playing, that it's, it's not this elite pass rushing team. And so they have to get creative with how they're going to, get some pass rush in there. And that ultimately is what's helping your secondary. That's what, allowed them to beat Caleb Williams at Notre Dame that year. Is he was throwing bad passes because his timing was off. They were confusing him. They were bringing pressure in his face. So all of that coincides together. And I think their secondary will be just fine. You talk about a safety who was the safety of the year. Leonard Moore just keeps getting better and better every game. I'd feel a lot more comfortable if Benjamin Morrison was back there, but I think Christian Gray has enough to do the job.
I agree. I am not nearly as concerned about the second. Again, if you're just going to watch one game and you're going to overreact to that, the way that, like the way that one team went about a specific game plan, and I realize he talked about Louisville as well, but let's remember they were thin in the secondary and they were patching things together in that game as well, because you didn't have Christian Gray in that game, so I would, like of those 3 things, I would rank them exactly the way that you did. I think the receivers, it is an issue if you fall behind by a couple of touchdowns and all of a sudden you've got to play catch up. What are you going to be able to get out of the passing game? Are you going to be able to hit enough? Because it hasn't been a really downfield explosive offense. But the flip side of that is, again, like when you look at across the board at the offenses that they're going to play, like I think Notre Dame is going to be just fine. Like Notre Dame's defense is going to keep them in pretty much every game. And that I don't think that is going to be a big issue. I think that there is a much greater chance that games play out similarly to how the Texas A&M game played out. Like that's what I see. That's how I kind of see the path through the playoffs going, because you don't have that just elite, lights out kind of offense that you're going to have to place. And I, and like the Howard Cross thing is a good point, but because of the fact now that he's essentially going to have like 6 weeks, like between,
he'll
by
be
the
ready
time
for that game. And that was smart of them.
And if you get Howard Cross and Riley Mills back together, I think that changes the whole complexion of things. Like the pass rush, it's all going to come together again if you get them playing the way they were playing together there for a few weeks before Cross's injury.
So, and another thing I would like to put out there is if Notre Dame does get into that situation where they need to get some, more passing, some downfield passing. If I'm Notre Dame, I wouldn't be afraid to go to a wide receiver set of Faison, Harrison, Bo Collins, and
Chris Mitchell.
There was another guy I was missing. Chris, you got to go with speed guys at that point.
But I'd probably flip Greathouse for Collins at this, because Collins just has not been consistent enough.
Yeah, but the thing about Collins is I think that and I know he's had the drops recently, but at least he's got other big games underneath his belt. I think it's like the Texas A&M game where you just need him to make a couple, just like senior catches essentially, right? So like, but I agree with you. I could see like Bo Collins and Greathouse kind of being, flip-flops, but I definitely think you would need Faison, Mitchell, and Harrison on the field. Like, look what Harrison did on that touchdown that got called back a few weeks ago, where he just absolutely took off from, like, that's the speed that you would need. And then I think the other thing that these guys failed to consider offensively is, yes, they don't have a dynamic passing game, but that's where Riley Leonard really makes up with it with his feet. He's an added dimension where even if everything is breaking down, pockets collapsing, there's nothing open downfield, Riley Leonard is always a threat, one, to not take a sack, not to take a negative play, and two, to always probably fall forward for at least 3 or 4 yards, right? Like, there's not a lot of negative plays ultimately in this offense outside of penalties, right? Like, Riley Leonard, I think when he took a sack against USC last week, I was like, that's the first sack I actually remember Riley Leonard taking this season. Like, he always finds a way to at least elude the pocket, get out of bounds, that sort of situation. That's a big factor that they are not considering in terms of, yes, Notre Dame's passing game isn't great, but that's where Riley Leonard steps in. He is able to kind of, mask that to a degree.
Crash This Train had a question in earlier that I didn't get in the mailbag. He says, why is it when Georgia has a bad game, then Kirby must be happy to be able to run his team ragged to get them ready, whereas Notre Dame is a sign that they aren't that good?
Well, Georgia's won national championships, so I think that
Notre Dame just hasn't achieved the status yet. That's what it comes down to, right? Like,
exactly.
Like Notre Dame has got to get to that status. You do, the conversation changes. That's just ultimately what it comes down to. Let me just ask you this. How much more exciting has this season been with this 12-team format?
Oh, I think it's tremendously more exciting because, as a team, it's not just going to be choked down to, the 4 best teams in the country, essentially. I just think it allows for a little bit more parity, and I think it allows for teams to ultimately prove themselves more. It's not a lot of assumptions and eye tests and this is what we think of you. I think the expanded playoff allows you to let the games kind of play out more, right? And a lot less, more assumptions. It gives obviously the smaller guy or the littler guy a bigger shot, and it's really not just going to be consolidated down to conference champions.
I mean, just look at the last month. And I mean, you can obviously go back, like every game for Notre Dame has mattered all season long. But like if like games that Iowa State has played in have mattered. Games that BYU and Utah have played in mattered. Colorado games mattered and until they got knocked off by Kansas. Kansas got to be a spoiler. Look at look at all these games and, in the Big Ten and the ACC, wherever they happen to be. And like every conference championship game this weekend now matters because of the expanded format. So I think it's been completely awesome. Like so many people thought that by expanding this playoff, you were going to water down the regular season and regular season games weren't going to matter. But literally hundreds more games have mattered because of this format than would have if it was just a 4-team playoff.
Agreed.
New episodes of Here Come the Irish, the docuseries, are going to drop Thursday night. Scale of 1 to 10. How excited are you for the new episodes?
Yeah, I'm an 8 out of 10, probably a 9 out of 10 because I watched the first couple episodes as I was, it was Labor Day weekend, and I was using them as a little pump up before the season, right before the Texas A&M game. And I was like, well, crap, beat Texas A&M. Now I don't have anything to go off of. But now that they've made the playoff, the season is over. Perfect timing. I'm sure they're going to show the whole 84 days and 50 days and Marcus Freeman laboring over NIU, every possibility. But because they're in the playoffs, because of the growth throughout this season, I'm excited to see as a fan what we'll get the inside access on. So I'm pretty excited about it. And I hope it fires me up more for the playoffs to come.
Corey said he watched them yesterday. I don't know how you got the sneak peek out there, Corey. I didn't think they dropped until tomorrow night. I don't know exactly what's going on with that, but I'd put it up there at probably a 7 or an 8 as well, because I'm just curious now to see what this is going to look like, in terms of those 84 days that you're talking about this. Like how much of this is how much are we going to get to see of, like the team's behind the scenes reactions?
They're going to show a scene of Marcus Freeman not sleeping for a whole day because all he thinks about is Northern Illinois.
Oh, Corey said he watched the first 2. So we watched the first 2. Okay. Well, yeah. Like Jesse said, I think I watched those right before the season started when they dropped both of those. I'm curious to see how much different the rest of these episodes are going to be, because now we're in the season, and like how much do we get to see behind the scenes of NIU? How much mic'd up stuff are we going to get to see from the season? Those kind of things.
My favorite conspiracy is someone said they threw the NIU game to make the show more interesting, to add more drama and spice to it.
I don't think you'd get Freeman to go along with that. I just something tells me no. I don't think it would happen. So have you heard about this Simpsons thing that Monday Night Football is going to do next week?
Yeah, and it sounds very similar to like the Nickelodeon cast that they did for a playoff game in the past before.
Yeah. It's the Simpsons Fun Day Football, Monday Night Football, Cowboys, Bengals. It is an alternate broadcast. You're still going to have the main Cowboys Bengals game on ABC and ESPN, but on Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and on NFL Plus, they're basically each of the Bengals and Cowboys players is going to appear on the screen as an animated player, and they're going to play it inside Adams Stadium in Springfield. Adams, ATOMS, like the Adams, the nuclear power plant. What do you think of this whole thing?
So, first of all, I love it because I respect the creativity and the approach to kind of get different audiences in, especially like kids and that sort of thing. And, how much The Simpsons is a kid's show these days, I don't know. But, it's tough though, because if it were anyone but the Cowboys, I would probably, maybe like watch a quarter of it or give it, some time. But since it's the Cowboys, unfortunately, I don't want to waste my time with it because it is my team, right? And so I like it, and I also think about, man, how much did the Simpsons have to like? It's basically free advertisement for the Simpsons, right?
Yeah.
So how much did the Simpsons have to shell out to be the animated show? Because like I said, they've done Nickelodeon, and I'm sure the NFL maybe had other partners out there potentially of different shows that they could.
Disney bought the rights to the Simpsons a while back. Like Disney bought the rights to a lot of the Fox properties, and the Simpsons is one of them. So this is like a wonderful little cross promotion for all the like the Disney stuff. So, like you said, like I think it's cool that they continue to target younger age demographics because, you know, all these sports, and the NFL is one of them. You know, they're trying to skew younger because the audiences have just, you know, steadily been growing older for the NFL and Major League Baseball for years. I think NBA is one of the few, you know, who's kind of managed to kind of buck that trend a little bit. So I think it's a cool little spin. But like you said, you know, like because of, you know, one, it's on the streamers, so I'm not going to go out of my way to go find it on the streamers. And two, because, you know, our team is involved, I'm definitely, you know, not going to go out of my way. I'm sure like the next morning on NFL Network on Good Morning Football or something, they'll show some clips to it. So I think it's interesting. And, you know, again, you know, like you said, CBS and Nickelodeon have done this kind of stuff before. So I think it's a cool little spin. I think I'm going to save this next question for you and Vince for tomorrow because you guys are always hurting to come up with rapid fire.
Hey. Don't subject me to that narrative, okay?
Well, do you want me to save this or do you want to talk about it right now?
You could save it, but don't let me in there of you guys are always struggling. I'm not shouldering that blame.
Okay. All right. That's fair. But that's because you don't have to come up with the rapid fire questions, right?
Well, I usually send Vince at least one or two
okay.
rapid fire questions.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and let you guys keep this because I'm sure old man Vince is going to want to tee off on it. So all right. Well, that's going to do it for tonight. We battled through some of the early tech issues, and I think things worked out okay.
I think I prevailed.
You did.
Pulled through for all of you.
Yep. Came out on top. You managed to work it out. So it's turned out pretty well. All right, good questions earlier tonight in the mailbag. A lot of good stuff that we had. As always, we will Jesse and Vince, like I said, they'll be in here tomorrow because I've got a Notre Dame women's basketball game coming up tomorrow night. Big one, ACC, SEC Challenge, Notre Dame and Texas at Purcell Pavilion.
Ooh, so coming off those losses, can't have it be 3 in a row.
Big bounce back opportunity, big bounce back chance. Big one coming up tomorrow night at home against the number 5 team in the nation. Number 4, I think, actually, in one poll. So should be a good one. So I'll be there. Vince and Jesse will be here tomorrow. TD4ND, thank you for the reminder. Smash that like button before you leave, and we do appreciate it. We'll talk to you later on IB Nation Sports Talk.